Hi everyone. Here's a little introduction. This shouldn't take too long to Moot Court. The presentation's not going to be super pretty. I tried making it beautiful, didn't work. I originally was going to go for like a brain rot theme, but the jokes only work if there are people there live. And so it's going to be, not the most aesthetically pleasing thing, but I want to get, a pretty brief introduction of Moot Court because you guys are busy. You've got a lot going on, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. So first of all, we're going to talk about what moot court is. So moot court is similar to mock trial, but we deal with appellate cases. So we're dealing with the kind of cases that might come in front of the Supreme Court. That means we're not calling witnesses, we're not introducing new evidence about the case and the facts of the case. Those are all set in stone. We are dealing with constitutional issues and questions of constitutional interpretation. And there are two types of competitions. There's an oral argument competition, which is where we would go to a specific place or maybe do it online, and both teams would submit a brief, and then judges would ask questions to both teams, and we would engage in the same kind of oral argument that they do at the Supreme Court. Like if you watch a Supreme Court case, that's what they're doing. And there's also a brief writing competition, which is where you write the same kind of briefs, but then that's all you're judged on. And then there's one case all year. We're going to talk a little bit more about that case in a bit. But first, we're going to talk about the rules of competitions. So both teams write briefs before rounds, and then teams are in pairs. So there's two petitioners and two respondents on two different teams, right? So the petitioners speak first. The petitioners are the equivalent of like the plaintiff or the prosecution. They're the ones that are suing. And they are the first petitioner is speaking for 8 minutes, the second petitioner is speaking for 9 minutes. Typically, in a moot court case, there's going to be two constitutional issues at stake, and so the first petitioner is going to deal with the first issue, the second petitioner is going to deal with the second issue. And then the respondents get up, respondent 1 for 10 minutes, respondent 2 for 10 minutes, and then the petitioner has 3 minutes of rebuttal. And so these blocks of time are not time for the petitioner to just talk for a whole bunch or the respondent to just talk for a whole bunch. The time to do a whole bunch of talking is in the brief. These periods of time are for judges to ask questions of the petitioners and of the respondents. And so you're only going to be very briefly outlining your arguments before judges start asking you really in-depth questions. Now, what is Dart Moot? So Dart Moot is fundamentally about education, right? So moot court is obviously really good, but the reason why we're doing moot court is not because it's fun, right? Even though it definitely is. We're doing it to learn more about the law, get better at public speaking, get better at academic writing, that kind of thing. Regardless of whether or not you're going into law, we think that's a very useful skill to have and that it's a useful club to take part in. And so the way we do that is through moot court competitions. Three different kinds. There are intramurals, which is within our own team. There's competitions through the AMCA, the American Moot Court Association. Those are going to be your flagship regional and national tournaments. And then there's different scrimmages and invitationals, which don't count for anything as far as like, national rankings or stuff like that. But we'll just be us against some other schools, either one-on-one or with a few different schools in person or online. We're a student-led organization. That means we're going to have a faculty advisor, but almost all of the decision-making and responsibility is going to be on us as the membership. And for now, at least, that membership is open. Who knows what's going to happen with the 30s or with the 31s, but for 29s and above, membership is open. Anyone can join. And so what's the current status of the club? The Council on Student Organization has certain rules for when a club is allowed to be registered. So you need a faculty advisor, you need 10 members, a president, a treasurer, a constitution, goals, mission, logo, that kind of thing. We have all of that. And so right now we're pending some meetings with COSO and a hearing to determine our status as an officially recognized club, but we've checked all the boxes. So the American Moot Court Association, they're going to require a letter from a faculty advisor to authorize us to compete. Since we have a faculty advisor, we're just waiting on them to draft that letter, and then we're going to be placed on a wait list for competitions. And so before we get official COSO recognition, it's going to be difficult for us to find meeting spaces. So right now we're looking for interim spaces and plans. We might have to do virtual meetings. I'm thinking we might actually be able to get an in-person space, but we'll keep everyone updated on that. And so what's the structure of the club? So we kind of have four flagship officer positions. So your president, your vice president, your treasurer, and your secretary. Very similar responsibilities to what they would have at a typical club, right? The president is in charge, the vice president helps the president, the treasurer is in charge of money, the secretary is in charge of like keeping notes and stuff like that. And then we're going to have specific committees. So two of them are going to be competition based. That's your oral argument committee and your brief writing committee. They're going to help students develop skills in oral argument, develop skills in brief writing. They're going to be especially important when we get a class of novices, but even now as we start, most of us aren't very experienced, and so as we start building those skills, the oral argument and the brief writing committee are going to help us out doing that. And then we have four committees that are going to be dealing with kind of the management of the club itself. That's your marketing committee, which deals with, social media, raising awareness. They're going to help a lot with recruitment. There's your admin committee, which is going to deal with communicating with COSO and with the Dartmouth administration. If we ever need to reach out to faculty for any reason, admin is going to help with that. There's finance, overseen by the treasurer. They're going to deal with our money and applying for funding, which is going to be especially important when we start going to actual competitions. We're going to need to get grants. And then tournaments is going to work on planning tournaments, planning scrimmages. If we ever host anything, the tournament committee is going to be very helpful with that. And we're going to hold officer elections every spring. That means that for now, we're not going to do elections. We're going to do interim selections. That's going to happen hopefully over the course of the next week, maybe 2 weeks. But please reach out to me with what officer position you want. We'll be talking a little bit about this more. Not necessarily everyone is going to get every position that they want, but everyone who asks me for a position will get a position. And I'm going to try my best to make sure everyone gets something that they can be happy with. Because, we're coming into this as the founding members. We all deserve to have some really good leadership opportunities as we kind of build this club together. So what are our plans for this year? In the fall term, we're going to work with COSO to get ourselves established as a club, and we're going to start working on preparing our briefs. I'm going to get us onto the waitlist for competition. I would assume that we wouldn't compete. If we do, it'll be November, and that would be super fun. That would be awesome if we're able to compete. But all the spots are full, and we don't have a great waitlist position. So most likely, we won't be able to go to an in-person competition this year. Maybe some scrimmages or what are they called? Invitationals, but I wouldn't get my hopes up too much. So the winter term, there's the brief competition, so we're going to need to submit our briefs. I don't know if the deadline for that is during winter term or during the winterim, but it's one of those two. And we're going to host an intramural tournament within our own club. This is especially important this year because we won't be able to compete outside of our own club, most likely. And so we'll try to get faculty to judge. If faculty, don't agree to that, we can judge it ourselves. But we'll have kind of an oral argument tournament so that we can start, scratch that itch of doing oral argument and also get experience. And then in the spring, we'll elect new officers for next year. We'll start planning out what we want to do next year when we'll actually be able to compete, which will be super fun. And we'll especially be focusing on recruitment. We'll set something up for dimensions, try to get a really high quality class of 30s, maybe open, maybe not. We'll decide that in the spring. And then the 2025 to 2026 case. So our case is Denolf versus OSU. OSU is Olympia State, not Ohio State. And it deals with two issues. The first is a equal protection issue. So Olympia State University has a very prestigious, this is all fake by the way, has a very prestigious criminal justice program. And this guy Denolf was a lecturer at OSU, and he applied to the criminal justice program. And he was a below average applicant, in that every single male applicant who was admitted into the criminal justice program had better stats than Denolf. But Denolf argues that many female applicants actually had worse stats than him. And so he's saying that he was the victim of discrimination, which was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and I think it was 2022 or 2023. They ruled that giving racial or sex-based preferences in college admissions was unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. And so he points to certain policies that Olympia State has, like, for example, fee waivers for certain classes of female applicants, workshops for female applicants, and also an evaluation of soft factors that, while it didn't explicitly take sex into consideration, it seems to give a preference to female applicants. Denolf argues that's why he was rejected, and he argues that that is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, the college argues that there's nothing unconstitutional at all about holistic admissions, and that's what they're doing. And that the Denolf didn't have the same kind of soft factors that many female applicants had. So he didn't come from a low-income background. He didn't have a very compelling narrative that was kind of crafted through his essays and stuff like that. And so the college is arguing that it was not sex that was the deciding factor. They're also arguing that the programs that they have to boost the number of female applicants don't actually provide a preference to female applicants, right? They're not giving sex-based preferences, but they are saying that it is a valid like institutional goal to have a more gender equitable class. You know, they cite studies that say that that's better for classes and stuff like that. So that's kind of the equal protection issue. And then there's a freedom of expression issue. So remember, Denolf was a lecturer at OSU, and he was teaching law to undergraduates. And he spoke out against his rejection in the college's admissions policy, both in and out of class. So in class, he was like calling on students, and he was looking down on male students who were in support of the policy, right? And he would just rail on and on about this policy in class. And he was also going to protests and getting on the national media and stuff like that. Very outspoken in opposition to the school's policy. The school is arguing that opposition, that public opposition and in-class opposition, was negative for the college. They saw a decline in donations. They saw a decline in applications. And because of that, they decided not to renew Denolf's contract. And the college says that was completely valid. This guy was not unionized. He didn't have any kind of protections, and he was harming the college, and so we didn't renew his contract. And the Denolf argues that this is an issue of freedom of expression, that OSU is a public university. They can't retaliate against people for their political opinions, and that's exactly what they did. So we'll ignore the stuff about brainstorming arguments. That's for when I thought that this was going to be a live meeting, and obviously it's not. And then here's a QR code with some cool resources. It has, the handbook. It has this year's case. It has a cool guide for moot court, guide to legal citations, a bunch of different really awesome stuff as we kind of start thinking about moot court and start looking to preparing arguments and preparing briefs. And yeah, that's all I had. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope this didn't take up too much of your time, and I hope you all had a great weekend. Whether you had family here or not, I went to Yale, I went to Connecticut, I had a ton of fun, didn't have family here. But yeah, thank you guys so much.